Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Valerio Coladonato, and I teach film history at Sapienza, University of Rome. I'm very glad to be here for this wonderful summer school and festival, and to have the opportunity not only to watch a wide variety of films and to meet people, but also to present 10 films by one of my favorite directors, and perhaps at the end of this festival also one of your favorite directors, hopefully, Federico Fellini. The lecture that I've prepared attempts to be an introduction, almost as a map of multiple journeys that we could take through his filmography and partly also through his biography. Well, the motif of the journey is quite an obvious one, because characters in Fellini's films are often on their way to somewhere, or sometimes getting lost. They roam the marginal spaces of the country. For example, in La Strada, they wander aimlessly through the city. For instance, in La Dolce Vita, the film that some of you might have just finished watching. They get stuff in traffic, as in the beginning of 8½, with the sequence that we will close this lecture with. They move, just like Fellini, between Italy's province and its capital city, but they also move in time. They move between the past and the present. They move between reality and other forms of perception. Dreams, memory, hallucination, desire. And these trajectories are sometimes overlapping with the evolution of society. So Fellini's journey is also a journey through a rapidly changing country, such as the Italy of the post-World War II period, the economic boom, the advent of modernity, and the rise of new forms of entertainment. First, the passage from popular cinema to auteur cinema for Fellini, and finally, in the last decades of his life, the appearance and rise of a new form of television, with the growing importance of private television channels and the media empire owned by Silvio Berlusconi, which will represent a sort of arch enemy towards the end of his life, because Fellini attributed some of the loss of importance and centrality of cinema to the way in which the so-called neo-television, commercial television, was changing the taste and the perception of his fellow citizens. So there are a number of themes that cut across Fellini's cinema and his biography. This connection between popular entertainment that he carries on from the very first years of his life, with an interest and a fascination for comic books, for the circus, for variety shows, and that will feed the imaginary and the experiences of a lot of his characters. But also, I would say, a growing fascination with the unconscious, and with the world of dreams, and with the depth and the interiority of both his characters and his own inner world. So we will try to keep these different levels together, but in order for us not to get lost, after all, I did promise a map, so I have to provide some kind of structure and some kind of order. I have divided this presentation into 5 short journeys. The first one is the actual journey that a young Federico Fellini undertook from his birth place, the seaside town of Rimini, on the eastern coast of Italy, on the Adriatic Sea, quite famous as a holiday location, and today also, or in recent decades also for its nightlife. But when Fellini was born there in 1920, it was a sleepy province town, a place with the rhythms and the habits of an agricultural society, and with a feeling that nothing major would ever happen there, and therefore with a cyclical sense of time, and a perception perhaps also of boredom that was disrupted, for example, by the arrival of fascist spectacles, as we see in the autobiographic film Amarcord, to which we will return a little later. This is a street artist's portrait of Fellini, surrounded by some of his most famous characters, which emphasizes how the imaginary world he created is now really overlapping with the perception of the city itself. And this is also strengthened by the creation and the opening of a recent museum dedicated to Fellini and his relationship to the city of Rimini, which is somewhat ironic and paradoxical, because the Rimini that Fellini portrays is not a Rimini that ever really existed. It's of course filtered through his imagination, and it can only exist after Fellini has actually left Rimini. This is This is described very well by Italo Calvino, a great Italian writer who wrote the preface of Fellini's book Fare un film, a sort of collection of short reflections on what it meant for him to be a director, and on the nature of creativity and on the craft of his work. And the preface by Italo Calvino, it seems to me, it contains some extremely smart and precise insights into Fellini's work. So I will quote at least 2 or 3 passages from there. Calvino writes, "The young man leaves the province, goes to Rome, and goes to the other side of the stream, makes cinema, becomes cinema himself. Fellini's film is cinema inverted, a projection machine swallowing the audience and camera turning its back on the set." I find it really fascinating, this idea that leaving the province to the city is not just a geographic journey, but it's the passage on the other side. Not just because Rome obviously was the capital of cinema, right? From the 1930s, the fascist regime had centralized all film activities and production in the city, attempting to create a sort of rival studios to the Hollywood system, with the foundation of Cinecittà, the state-owned studios and equipment, with the foundation of a national film school and of an institute devoted to audiovisual production. So even if in the first few years of Italian film history, the centers of production were spread out through the country, not only Rome, but also Naples, Turin, Milan, etc. From the 1930s onwards, Rome became synonymous with cinema, and in general with the cultural industry. So when a young Fellini leaves Rimini with the excuse of attending university, but he probably spent much more time outside of the university and in the city streets, and often and soon also in the offices of a satirical journal called Marco Aurelio, that we will talk about a little bit later. He really anticipates the journey that he will describe, for example, with Marcello, the character from La Dolce Vita, someone aiming to make something of himself through his immersion in the big capital. But also, he establishes then a new relationship with his old town, a relationship tinged with nostalgia, a sort of goodbye that he knew would be forever. So it's not an accident then that in the film I Vitelloni, which is his first really autobiographic movie, this is a shot from an image from that film. The one character that Fellini identifies with, Moraldo, is the youngest of the group of friends, of this group of eternal adolescents who never really become fully adults, who have some vague dreams and hopes about the future but never find the courage to make them happen. And the one member of this group who leaves the city of Rimini is the character representing Fellini himself. So the film ends with a train ride, with the beginning of the train ride away from Rimini and towards Rome. In fact, after I Vitelloni, Fellini kept among his ideas and sketches for new projects a new film treatment and then later script titled Moraldo va in città, Moraldo goes to the city. The idea, however, that this double movement, going towards the city and leaving Rimini, changes something fundamental in his world, will be confirmed more than 2 decades later with the film I mentioned before, Amarcord. In 1972, the fresco of the community of the town of Rimini here completely transfigured. Right? It's really not realistic anymore. It is a collection of memories. It is sometimes based on characters that Fellini knew, but it's completely transformed through an almost cartoonesque vision of nostalgia and of time passing, and of this town belonging to a world that will never come back. So it's very fitting that the images of Rimini that are presented to us by Fellini are now almost cardboard pictures. Some of them really are almost two-dimensional, like the transatlantic liner Rex that characters await for on a beach as it appears in the night while they're sharing intimate stories about each other's lives. The relationship between the province and the capital city, therefore, is one of the themes that Fellini will return to again and again, and it's probably one that allows for spectators around the world to identify with his stories very strongly. Because even if the specificities of this town are described with a minutiae of details, this sense of both confinement and a sense of immobility that provincial societies produce, and the aspiration for something bigger, will be reflected in the eyes of a lot of viewers around the world. The trip, then, the first journey that Fellini makes is a journey that will basically alter the fate of Italian cinema also for another reason. Because the kind of images that he will create of the city of Rome, here is one, of course, from La Dolce Vita, the Trevi Fountain. The kind of images that he will create about the city of Rome will impact the perception of the city and of Italy around the world. Think of this extremely quick transition. The Rome of post-World War II is the Rome in ruins that has been bombed and has been affected obviously by the devastation of occupation and then liberation, as it is captured, for instance, in Bicycle Thieves or Rome Open City. Only a few years later, a sort of international tourist gaze led by Hollywood productions arriving to Italy changes initially this image, and I'm thinking here of a film such as Roman Holiday by William Wyler. But the real connection between the archaic and traditional images of monuments and tourist sites and the advancement of modernity, of Rome as a place that provides new ideas about lifestyle, about fashion, about consumption, about advertisement, really happens at the beginning of the 1960s, and Federico Fellini plays a key role in this process and in the transformation of the image. However, this doesn't mean that Fellini's view of Rome is only a positive one. And I want to show you a clip, a short sequence by a film that unfortunately I've had to leave out from the selection of titles that we are seeing in this festival, because there are too many simply, but that I think really represents one of the most fascinating attempts in Italian cinema to capture something about the city of Rome outside of the stereotypes and of the postcard images. And this is an image from the eponymous film Rome, 1972. It's a much more ambiguous look at what the contrast between the past and the present creates in this city. It's a view of the city that is almost hellish at times. It's a mixture of hypermodernity, of traffic, of chaos. One of the most bizarre sequences is of a traffic jam along the ring road of the capital city, where everyone gets stuck and cars start honking and people start screaming and animals pass by and overcome cars, and it's a sort of like monstrous vision of hypermodernity mixed and interspersed with ancestral images of ruins, monuments, of shepherds leading sheep across the streets as if it was in a countryside field, and of mythical images and archetypes such as the vision of a prostitute that again appears again and again in nightly scenes, from Nights of Cabiria to La Dolce Vita and Amarcord in Fellini's films. So let's watch these few minutes of a transfigured vision of the city of Rome from 1972's film Roma. So this film brings to the maximum Fellini's capacity to work through fragments without a linear plot, but really by evoking sensations through sounds, through light effects, and producing a sort of collage, a sort of magmatic flow of images and apparitions. In fact, Roma was influenced also by the work of one of his collaborators, Bernardino Zapponi, a screenwriter that will co-sign Fellini's films in the second part of his career. But somehow he will also bring back something of the creative origins of Fellini, because Fellini really went through multiple phases in his storytelling approach. And I want to go back to the roots. That is, I want to walk the second journey briefly from comic strips to cinema. So if you have the impression that sometimes Fellini's film are made by episodes, by moments, by apparitions, by fragments that are loosely related to one another, as is evident in the last clip that I showed you, it's not by accident. It's because Fellini's training was not in the long form of the feature film, right? As a creator, he wasn't raised or trained to imagine his stories through the three acts of the classical Hollywood narrative, or through the evolution of the protagonist and the arc of transformation of the hero, or through the techniques of dramatic conflict between the hero and the opponent, and so forth and so forth. He was really shaped in his thinking and in his creative process by the world of comic books, of strips, of short moments of condensation of text and images, of the distortion of the graphic style that emphasizes certain aspects and hides other aspects of reality. He started drawing at a very early age. Here is an image of the cinema theater Fulgor that also appears in Amarcord. And he made caricatures of film stars that were so beautiful that the owner of the cinema asked him to display those caricatures so that they could function as advertisements for the audience. And so he paid his early viewings of films in Rimini thanks to his drawing abilities. Then he sent submissions to magazines and journals with short episodes or comedic strips or even jokes that were published under the name of Federico and often featured a sort of surrealist humor detached from the concerns of everyday that already pointed to his ability of transcending and transforming reality. Here, for instance, I put one which is a confrontation between a thief and a man. So the thief points the gun to this man and says, either your bag or your life. So either you give me your bag or I will kill you. And the man replies, which bag? A leather bag, a study bag, a kangaroo bag, which bag? You have to specify, young man. So basically, you can see also in the architectural style in the background, like the distortion of the perspective. It's really, there's really something that will come out also in the visual style of his films later on. The comic books and the magazines that Fellini was fascinated by, some of them included American comic books, others were more satirical journal depicting events from political news in Italy. But there's really one name that stands out in his biography, because it was a training ground both for him and for a generation of screenwriters working in Rome in the 40s and 50s. The name is Marco Aurelio, so it's named after the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. And Fellini wrote more than 700 pieces for this magazine in his formative years. He was both an assiduous reader and a collaborator, and he learned the art of synthesis there. He learned the art of collaboration. He had to test jokes with other people. He had to respond to other people's jokes. He had to work under pressure to produce something new. So in fact, even if he did not attend any sort of formal film school, we can say that he received a very solid training through his collaboration with this magazine. In fact, even when he was an established director, at the top of his career, he would keep drawing first, rather than imagining the details of the dialogue or the full trajectory of the narrative. And certain images, here you could probably recognize the scene from I Vitelloni, where the group of friends is observing the sea and reflecting on their life. Certain images appear to him before he even starts working at the film with a level of detail and intensity, and with a level of, I would say also, specificity in the character's posture or dressing, way of dressing, etc. This is, again, you might recognize a scene from Nights of Cabiria with the two prostitutes and the man playing with fire when the husband of the main character is desperately roaming the night streets of the city. And we can find specific correspondences and matches between drawings by Fellini and actual images from his film. This is the vehicle in which Gelsomina and Zampano in La Strada go around with their traveling show, and this is the actual shot from the film. These are some of the characters and designs of the clothes and makeup in Amarcord, the key character of Gradisca. Fellini even wrote by hand comments and side notes to specify what certain details should mean or represent in these characters. Here's another one that you might remember if you watched the film yesterday. So why is this training in the art of drawing and caricature and comic strips so important? It's because its roots, the roots of Fellini's cinema, no matter how artistic or or how much appreciated it might have become by intellectuals and critics, etc., but the roots of his work are in popular culture. The roots of his work are in a form of image creation that has to communicate to the widest audience possible. Basically, again, this is something that Calvino writes, the strength of the image in Fellini's films does not feed into the codes of any figurative culture. It's based in the redundant and disharmonious aggressiveness of newspaper graphics. So it's something that must hit you immediately. It mustn't lose itself in any sort of theorization or intellectual abstraction. And Fellini had the habit of drawing continuously. Whenever he had interviews with producers or actors or with common people, he said, I take graphic notes of faces, noses, mustaches, ties, handbags, the way people cross their legs when they come to see me in my office. I've always doodled ever since I was a child. It's a kind of conditioned reflex, an automatic gesture. So even in the way he describes this activity, we can see that there's no layer of theorization or intellectual reflection. It's almost a second nature for him to process the world and transfigure it through the distortion and the style of comic strips. The art of caricature was also central in a key passage that Fellini makes towards the end of World War II between magazines and cinema. He had already started writing dialogues or collaborating to screenplays. He wasn't really well known outside of the film industry, but he had made a name for himself as someone who could solve problems of screenwriters and directors who needed to act quickly to respond to some sort of unexpected event. So they would call him to a set to say, hey, the main actor is not available today, we need to change this scene, can you help us? He was able, with the rhythm of work and with his creativity, to propose solutions quickly. But in particular, there was a moment in which the film world noticed Fellini thanks to his collaboration to the key masterpiece launching neorealism both in Italy and worldwide. And I'm referring to Roberto Rossellini's Rome Open City. Where was Fellini when he was asked to participate to the script of Rome Open City? This is a lesser known but fascinating episode in his life. So Fellini was trying to avoid being drafted when he was in Rome during basically the darkest months of World War II. He married his wife Giulietta Masina almost in secret. He was adventurously trying to sneak from one apartment to the other, from one film set to another. And then after the liberation of the capital by the Allied army, the US and British armies, he found a new way to make ends meet by opening up with a friend a place where they would draw sketches and caricatures of the GIs, of the soldiers stationed in Rome, so that they could take with them a souvenir. The place was called the Funny Face Shop, and the name was in English. This means that somewhere in Great Britain or in the US, some families might have a caricature of their grandfather or grand-grandfather drawn by Fellini, and they might not even know it. But while he was there, he was approached by the communications officers of the army to draw a very short propaganda animated film with the title of Hello Jeep. It was supposed to be the story of a jeep of the Allied army stationed in Rome, describing how the soldiers were trying to help the population establish a new life after the liberation from Nazism and fascism. The project was launched, perhaps it's still somewhere in the basement of some producer, or maybe at the Ministry of Military Affairs in Italy. Somebody else says it was taken by the distributor of Rome Open City to the US, because it was supposed to be screened together with Rome Open City. But nobody's really found traces of it in recent decades. Even if someone said that perhaps the creators of Cars, by the Pixar movie, were influenced by the style of drawing of Fellini and his partner for this short animated movie. In any case, he was there at the Funny Face shop, and while he was working at Hello Jeep, that Fellini was approached, also because of his friendship with Aldo Fabrizi, to collaborate as a screenwriter to Rome Open City. As you might know, Rome Open City puts together 2 episodes related to the resistance in Rome under the German occupation. One is the story of a woman who's in love with a partisan, and the partisan is made prisoner by the German army, and the woman who tries to run after the truck that is taking her man away is shot and killed on the street. And this is an episode that Aldo Fabrizi witnessed in real life in the streets of Rome. The other episode is a story of a priest who was secretly helping the resistance, and therefore was also made prisoner, tortured, and killed by the Nazis. Initially, Rossellini wanted to make a documentary film out of these stories, and he approaches Fellini again to solve a screenwriting problem, because he wants now to turn the film from a documentary to a feature-length film. And you can really see the different souls of both realism and melodrama, of the almost documentary quality of the actions of the resistance, and the expressionist lighting in the torture scene. So the launch of neorealism is in fact the collaboration between Rossellini as a director, between 2 theater stars at the time, Anna Magnani and Aldo Fabrizi, who were not big film stars, but who would become film stars thanks to this film, and of a group of screenwriters, among whom was Federico Fellini. And this begins a sort of intensive training as a neorealist screenwriter. Fellini will also collaborate to Paisan, another major success about World War II and the liberation of Italy, directed also by Rossellini. He would collaborate with Pietro Germi, with Lattuada, with a number of great directors of the neorealist period. So the influence of this particular moment in Italian cinema will be of great importance, but will not really define Fellini's career in the following decade. Here is a picture of Fellini on the right, talking to 2 of the major neorealist directors in those years, Vittorio De Sica on the left and Roberto Rossellini in the middle. And here's a caricature made by Fellini in 1950 of Vittorio De Sica, the man on the left. So Fellini transitions from comic strips to cinema thanks to neorealism, but he will not stop there. Neorealism will be a sort of temporary phase, a temporary station where he learns, in particular, how to observe reality, how to observe people, how to observe society, how to use spaces, how to work with faces. He will be an extraordinary discoverer of faces, just like Pasolini, for example. He learns how to use details of everyday habits or moments that would not have the dignity of big dramatic actions to convey emotions and meaning. So it's a crucial moment for him, but it's not really his vocation, right? Nobody thinks of Fellini, especially after the 1960s, as a primarily realist director. Fellini is first associated with fantasy, escape, dream, invention, and so forth and so forth. And I want to show you a short video that is actually not based on one of Fellini's films, but on one of Vittorio De Sica's films, because I think it helps us grasp some of the qualities that Fellini absorbs through the neorealist phase and through his experience in the 1940s and early 50s with neorealist directors, and that he will actually carry on also in later years and in later phases of his career. This short video is based on the comparison of two different versions of Vittorio De Sica's film Indiscretions of an American Wife. So basically, De Sica decided at some point to work with a Hollywood producer, David O. Selznick, and that meant he did not have the final cut on the film. So two versions exist of this film, one cut by the director and one cut by the producer. And what this short video shows us is the stark difference between the styles of Hollywood cinema and neorealist cinema. And I think if you keep in mind later what we see here, you will clearly observe how Fellini learned some of these techniques.
If I had to conduct an experiment that would yield insight into neorealism, I'd build a time machine and travel to Italy circa 1952. I'd ask Vittorio De Sica to make a film using Hollywood actors, like Montgomery Clift and Jennifer Jones. I'd then team De Sica up with a Hollywood producer, the kind that liked to impose his will and sensibility onto a film, someone like David O. Selznick. In bringing these two worlds of cinema together, I'd hope for a clash in sensibilities so great that it would result in two cuts of the same film, one by De Sica and the other by Selznick. I would run these two films side by side and examine each cut, and in the difference, I would find something to say about the essence of neorealism. Both films start with a shot of a city, but Selznick not only tells you which city, but connects this city to the theme of love. Selznick's second shot shows a letter that spells out the central tension of the film. Meanwhile, De Sica's opening takes almost twice as long, but reveals far less. Already in the first few minutes, we can detect two distinct approaches to cinema. If we sync up some of the shots used in both versions, we can more clearly see the difference in approach. Selznick consistently prefers a shorter take than De Sica. For Selznick and most of Hollywood, The act of walking needs only to be implied, not endured. We can see this strategy at work in the following scene. Desika shows Montgomery and Jennifer's entire walk through the restaurant, whereas Selznick applies this walk by jump cutting through it. These in-between moments are what most movies seek to cut out, and yet it's these in-between moments that Desika seems to be valuing. Syncing up another scene, we're able to see another value of Desika, which Selznick sees as disposable, certainly contrary to Hollywood filmmaking. Note where Selznick cuts. This is a standard movie-making cut. In fact, most directors would have called cut on the set soon after Jennifer left the frame. Desika, however, keeps rolling. He lingers on the space that the lead character has just left to stay on others who are still there or about to enter the frame. This is a favorite move by Desika. He does it throughout the film. His main characters leave a space, but his cameras don't follow, nor does he cut. He lingers on extras that we'll never get to know. For Desika, these extras are fellow inhabitants, not extra, but vital, and therefore worthy of some time. By lingering, he decenters the primary characters. Selznick has cut almost every one of these lingering moments out. Lingering on those who add nothing to the story is considered excessive, or even worse, a distraction, derailing the plot or drawing attention away from the stars. It is an unnecessary diversion, like this wedding passing by, which he also cut out. What Selznick sees as waste and excess becomes the essence of a different kind of cinema and sensibility, in which shots linger and veer off to include others, in which in-between moments seem to be essential, in which time and place seem more critical than plot or story. To ask what is neorealism is to ask, what is cinema?
So it's clear from the comparison how there's something fundamentally different in the idea of cinema that neorealism and Hollywood produce. And even if Fellini will abandon realistic stories, characters, settings, etc., I believe he will carry a lot of this lesson with him. The emphasis on time and place rather than on action. The long takes that absorb marginal details and allow for the exploration of faces and characters that even will not reappear in the film. There's a lot of collective sequences in Fellini. If you watched A City of Women yesterday, you saw how he handles the chaos and energy of a feminist meeting attended by hundreds of women, maintaining the focus on some key sentences or moments, but also allowing for the exploration of the background. The camera movements that immerse in space and create a sense of fluidity will be developed more and more by Fellini starting from the late 1950s. So he will rely less on the type of economical editing of Hollywood cinema that cuts out the so-called dead moments or the unnecessary moments, and will allow rather for an exploration of perception. What do we hear? What do we see? How are we present with both what seems to be central and with what seems to be marginal in the scene? And this break from neorealist setting, but this application of some of neorealism lessons in terms of style, is really what also another great intellectual that collaborated with Fellini will recognize to him. And I'm talking about Pier Paolo Pasolini, who will be the co-screenwriter for Nights of Cabiria. So let me read you something that Pasolini wrote about Fellini and how he became really an innovator at the moment in which neorealism seemed to have finished its creative impulse in the mid-1950s. Pasolini writes, Fellini is not a conscious innovator of neorealist taste as a cultural and historical moment. His innovation was more violent and explosive, the more unconscious and uncommitted it is. He is all immersed in the act, burning in the axis of light. Rossellini influenced him in the sense that the love of reality is stronger than reality. The real world of Rossellini's and Fellini's films is transfigured by the excess of love for their reality. Both of them place in their portrayal, in their framing, such an intensity of affection. Basically, it's as if something from the person who's looking progressively attaches itself to the image. The gaze stops being objective and becomes more and more subjective. What we see on the screen belongs less to the world, to the outer world, and more to the inner world. This is very subtle in films such as La Strada, and it becomes obviously more present in La Dolce Vita. Finally, it explodes in 8½, right? So we go from neorealism to a strong subjective vision in which the love for reality becomes stronger than the vision of reality in the span of just a few years. We go from neorealist cinema to auteur cinema, so a strong subjective vision that carries all the weight and the presence of the creator in just a few years. I want to then talk about the fourth journey that I think is crucial in this passage, and it's not a very we always think of Fellini as an Italian director, and of course that is true because Fellini is emblematic of a certain ideology of Italy. He really delves into the myths, the collective images and archetypes that form the unconscious of the Italian nation. However, if we look at both how his films were produced from the 1950s onwards, and if we look at the passage from being a director to an auteur, maybe one of the most emblematic auteurs in cinema, so being a distinctive figure who's recognizable because of his specific universe, being someone who has an adjective. We can say Fellinian or Fellinesque, and many people will know what we're referring to. Well, this is also thanks to the role of France in the co-production of his films and in the recognition of Fellini's cinema, especially through French critics and through the Cannes Film Festival. Here I put, for example, a homage to Fellini that the festival made after his death in 1993. Here's a coin associated to that, created by UNESCO. Here's an edition of the Cannes Film Festival in 2014, celebrating Marcello Mastroianni and his collaboration with Fellini. But in general, the strategies of promotion of Fellini's films that were devised for the release of his films in France became really important in conveying an image of the director that the wide audience became familiar with. Let's take the example of La Dolce Vita. When it was released in France, it was promoted both as an intellectual and sophisticated and artistic film, and as a popular and scandalistic film that could attract a very wide audience. These are the covers of two publications that came out at the same time, and they don't seem to refer to the same thing at all. Because the one on the right, it's in black and white. It has a French actress, Enouk Aimé, and it's a novelized version of the film. So if you flip it through, you read the story of the film, emphasizing all the intimate moments, all the sophisticated philosophical reflections, all the sexual ambiguity, and so forth. The one on the right was a photo novel. So it was a summary of the film with pictures and with comic strip lines that expelled basically all of the most scandalous aspects. You did not have the suicide of one of the characters. You did not have the scene of the orgy. It was addressed at a wider audience. You have an example of a page here, and I think what this type of promotion that was made during the release of the film in France and for the Cannes Film Festival really captures something special and unique about Fellini's cinema. That it was able to keep together the high and the low, the most innovative aspects in style and in narrative of auteur cinema, and the larger appeal of movie stars and of a story that captured the transformation of society during the years of the economic boom. So I think France played a big role, partly because, for example, La Dolce Vita was co-produced by the French company Pathé, the big production and distribution company, that made plans of how to advertise the film. There was a huge cutout cardboard image of Anita Ekberg on the Champs-Élysées when the film was released. There were advertisements in the press that emphasized, alongside the actors, also Fellini's image. And remember that before the mid-1950s, the image of the director or of the auteur, the presence of the director or of the auteur, was not a given, right? Until a certain period in film history. Of course, it was actors. Well, first it was producer and then actors that had the recognizability among audiences. And it's really thanks to French film critics and to the politics of the auteur that we tend to associate then films with certain directors. Fellini became part of an iconography of the director at work. He was portrayed in photographs during the making of his films, in books that followed, for example, the making of La Strada. He was the object of journals, for example, by his assistant director, Dominique Delouche, Journal d'un bidoniste, so the journal of Il bidone is the swindle, so journal of a swindler. He was the object of one of the first collection of books by academic writers that focused on cinema, analyzing film styles and the techniques for an emerging generation of film students in France. And this iconography of the director at work, the director immersed in the chaos of the set, cables, lights, machines, and the idea of a director who controls actors and characters almost through strings, as if they were puppets, is of course the result of this type of promotion of his films that became standard in France and then in the rest of the world, but also of the willingness of Fellini to put himself at the center of these promotion strategies. He also drew himself with a hat and a red scarf as a master of puppets. He also displayed himself showing to the actors the gestures and the expressions that they should perform towards the set photographers. These are images, for example, from 8½, where Fellini was showing to Marcello Mastroianni the way that he should act. So it's a self-mythology that surrounds Fellini and that Fellini participates in, that creates the image and the notion of an old, powerful director, of the creator that is able to transform an inner world into a vision. Of course, this angered some of his collaborators. Some of his screenwriters were not happy with the fact that Fellini got all of the attention, or that the collaborative nature of the creation of his films was obliterated and forgotten, thanks to this powerful message of the genius creator, of the director who's at the center of his world. And finally, I want to conclude before, hopefully, if you'd like to, we can exchange some ideas and I can take some of your questions, with a last journey that is not physical, but it's towards the interior world, in the depths of the unconscious that Fellini starts to explore, most notably after 8½, and in his life after the encounter with psychoanalysis, in particular Jungian psychoanalysis, and which will impact both the way that he makes films and the way in which he perceives the world. If you're interested in reading or perhaps seeing more of this, I really recommend The Book of Dreams, which is a sort of private journal, but it's also like a creative journey in which Fellini, upon the suggestion of his psychoanalyst, recorded, so he kept a book next to his bed, and every morning when he had a dream that he remembered, he immediately sketched and wrote all the details of his dreams. And it's an extraordinary testament to the way in which our mind operate and put together myth and archetypes and personal memory and collective imagery, and the way in which, in fact, he was processing some of the constant questions of his work, the relationship to religion, the relationship to sexuality, the relationship to time, the idea of aging, the process of creativity, and so forth, and so forth. And I think that in the light of what the second part of his career produced, the films that are much more experimental in terms of mixing reality and fantasy and dream and hallucination, etc., entering his world through the Book of Dreams is a way of providing a larger context and a deeper map of the unconscious, not just of an individual, but if we follow the Jungian theories, of a whole society. So I want to conclude with the first sequence of 8½, because it captures really well these, the completion of this process of treating dreams and reality as equivalent, as having the same dignity and as having the same power, both aesthetic and cognitive. And the film was in fact structured around a series of dreams that seamlessly fade in and fade out. And it was distributed in certain provincial areas of Italy, with the exhibitors coloring the dream sequences so that the audience wouldn't get confused. So obviously producing the exact opposite effect of what Fellini intended. Because if you watch the film as it is now distributed and as it is known, it's very hard sometimes to pinpoint the exact moment of transition between objective perception and dreams. But what I really find fascinating with this idea of journey is that it begins in a traffic jam and in complete silence, and it's one of the sequences that most conveys both a sense of physical oppression and of existential oppression, of getting stuck, of not knowing where to go, of feeling like it's impossible to get out of a certain rut, which in Fellini's case was a creative rut. And the sequence ends with a fall, from up high in the sky towards the depth of the unconscious.
Ehi! Giù! Vieni giù! Giù definitivamente.
So the sequence is extraordinary also because it affirms the freedom, both existential and creative, that Fellini's looking for, but also the constraints of the producers that try to, bring him down for good. But the freedom also in terms of techniques. We start seeing from this film onwards the camera roaming freely, detached from the point of view of characters, even more than it would have been in the previous films. The freedom in narrative structures, the back and forth between past and present, the fragmentation of the narrative itself, the freedom in the variety of styles in acting, and the mixture of realistic, melodramatic, and grotesque characters, all in the same sequences. and the freedom in general of a director who kept evolving, exploring the same questions, but always evolving in terms of format and maintaining a recognizability that still stands the test of time. Thank you, and feel free to ask me. I'll try to address any comments, curiosity. I'm curious also to know whatever you've watched so far and your reaction to the films that have been included in the program.
Já vás jenom poprosím, budete-li mít nějaké otázky nebo komentáře, zvedněte ruku, podávám mikrofon, aby to slyšeli dámy překladatelky a mohli Valeriu Kaldinátovi to přeložit. Takže kdokoliv chce.
I'm sorry, well, you've already addressed the relationship of Fellini with other Italian directors like Pasolini and De Sica, but I would like to ask about his relationship with Visconti, because I've heard that they sort of, especially in the later years of like past the neorealist era, that they've both like presented their very own ideas of I don't know, maximalist style, and so yeah, I'm just curious about like what are the significant points in their artistic dynamic and their relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very interesting question because it's true that they might seem somehow connected or at least coming out of the same context, but they also have radical differences. And I think one of the main differences is in the fact that Fellini came out of popular culture, and for reasons that were intrinsic but somehow also external, he found himself in the glamorous world of auteur cinema. But even when he entered that territory, a lot of the dramatic solutions, a lot of the inspiration still came from the circus, still came from variety shows, still came from comic books, etc., etc. Whereas Visconti was by origin an aristocratic. He was an extremely sophisticated intellectual. At the same time, he was a Marxist who really believed that cinema should perform a specific function, right? He was influenced by the thought and the work of Antonio Gramsci, the founder of the Italian Communist Party and also intellectual, who talked about the role of national popular culture in uniting the masses and in creating a sense of collective sentiment. So when Visconti used certain aspects of popular culture, he really used them with this specific purpose. But otherwise, I think in terms of sensation, emotion and aesthetics, they really came from two different worlds. And as much as Visconti was political, Fellini was, at least in his intentions, apolitical. He claimed to be not particularly interested, even though he unwillingly intersected a lot of the key crucial political questions of his time. But again, they did them, one, Fellini from instinct and from emotion and not from theoretical reflection, and the other one from his studies and his knowledge and with a specific purpose and with a specific program.
Nějaké další otázky, komentáře?
Hi, so thank you, it was really interesting, and I just wanted to ask you, how is the relationship nowadays in Italy towards Fellini? Is he popular also for the younger generation, or is it just for nerds, or yeah, how's the relationship?
Well, I think, so I would put it this way. Just like Fellini said that he didn't have to know certain writers like Joyce or certain artists, because after they had permeated the culture, right? After Joyce's innovation in writing novels became part of the way that everyone thinks about, literature and, inner thoughts being expressed in a certain way, etc., etc., then he didn't have to know them. I would say there is a similar relationship between the younger generation and Fellini today. At some point, Fellini permeated so much Italian culture that now it's probably a name that's not attached to deep knowledge of specific films. So you might ask young people, what films have you watched by Fellini? And they might not have a specific answer. They might remember beats and parts of it. But somehow they are influenced by Fellini. I think what's interesting is that at least in university context, right, which is where I work, when I taught a class on Fellini alone, it was an act of constant discovery for young students, because the country that Fellini describes is not just 100 or 70 or 60 years away. It's almost like centuries away for them. The kind of transformation from an agricultural society to a modern society that would have been fresh and immediate to audiences, for them it really belongs to another era. So there's almost sometimes the necessity for an act of translation, even if it's a director that 2 generations ago everybody knew and everybody was familiar with.
Hi, hello. I would like to ask about Rimini and his relationship with it. I'd like to ask if it was for him like a deliberate and conscious decision to make it, like you said, a like caricature, or it was a different kind of relationship to his past.
Thank you. Well, I think it was deliberate in the sense that that's the way he processed the world, right? It wasn't just with Rimini, but it was with everyone, right? As he said of his act of constantly drawing, sketching, it was almost automatic for him to start noticing details and expanding them and transforming reality into some sort of stylized version of it. But I think for Rimini, there's another aspect there, which has to do with a break from his own identity, meaning that the idea that Fellini had of a lot of people that were born and grew up under fascism was an idea of an interrupted growth. It was an idea of having been stifled, but also not having had the courage to really become adult, right? So I don't think he was portraying and thinking and feeling about Rimini just as a place. He treated Rimini as a phase of his life and maybe as a phase of the country. He treated Rimini as a condition, an existential condition in which everyone was stuck, right? Not really becoming adult ever.
Kdo ještě nějaké otázky, komentáře, připomínky? I think that's all. It looks like it.
Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the films, and don't hesitate to come and talk to me after if you've noticed something that interested you in the films. I'll be very happy to hear what your reactions are. Thank you.